I've been meaning to give this presentation for 3 years now, and I'm surprised I'm surprised that I haven't given it. And I also had something so different in mind than what we're going to do tonight. I like even this year, I thought, no, we have to do this in the San Carlos gym because we're going to get together, we're going to drink some wine, and we're going to grade some papers. Like once you get your hands on what this is, you'll understand it. But obviously, we can't do that. And so the presentation I wrote this week is just slides and me talking at you. But my purpose here is just like, I need you to understand how different MYP grading practices are from traditional grading in other schools. And so I just need to break that down. And so it's a lot of talking at you, but we'll go to Q&A. Sally, could we pull up the slides? And I'm just going to dive right in. This is going to be a giant monologue for a while, so hang on to your seats. We'll go to the first slide. I want to tell an anecdote to get this kicked off. That one, thank you. When I was a middle and high school principal in St. Louis at a non-IB school, I had a 7th grade math science teacher who organized her grade book this way. Like she needed to come up with grades for 100% of a grade, and 35% was the lab, 25% was quizzes, 10% was homework, 10% was tests, and 20% was final exam. And the only thing that the school required was that final exams couldn't be more than 20%. And this is, candidly, this in my 15 years as a high school English teacher, we did things like this before. We had these categories that were weighted in these ways. And actually, even with some colleagues who are on this call, other schools are still doing this. So this is not uncommon practice. Now, here's what happened to a girl in 7th grade at that school. And this is true, although I'm simplifying a little bit. But she earned an average of 85% in all of the categories except for quiz. And in a traditional grading scale, an 85% is generally a B. She took a quiz that semester that was worth 16 points, and she did very poorly on it. She earned 4 points, which is 25%. That's a low F on the traditional grading scale. Unfortunately, the teacher only assigned 1 quiz in the semester. So there was 1 low F in that weighted category. And that caused the students' weighted and averaged final semester grade to move from an 85 to a 70. And I remember explaining this to the teacher, and she was like, yeah, but that's, those are the rules. That's the way it's set up. I'm thinking, like, you cannot let this 20-minute quiz take this child's grade from a B to a C minus. It's malpractice. And actually in that school setting, it's like, wow, are you changing my grade? Are you, the principal, going to change the grade in the class? And I was like, well, yes, I am. And I'm going to tell everyone on the faculty why I did it, so we can have an honest conversation about it. I also remember in my own practice in 15 years as an English teacher, as a high school English teacher, taking in a set of essays and sort of reading through the essays and thinking, okay, and like looking for the best essay and thinking, this is the high standard. And I can see now, looking back at that is malpractice. That when I am setting the standard after the task, I haven't been thoughtful enough about what we are aiming at. So this is not uncommon. This is what grading looks like in a lot of schools in the world. This is my first time giving the presentation, so I forget what the next slide is. Let's go and find out. Oh yeah, so I want to just consider the many purposes that assessment has in education. So the most obvious one, the one that I think all of us can take some joy in and get around, is that teachers are trying to check for understanding. I'm teaching, I want to know if you, the student, are learning. And so I give assessment so I can find out what's happening for you when we're doing this. But in other schools, in many schools, grades can also work in another way. Like teachers think that if they didn't give a grade for something, then the students wouldn't do it. So we are motivating or controlling students with our grades. Grades are a way of controlling students. Unfortunately, it's also a way of ranking students. And actually, that's what I was doing when I was finding the best essay and just sort of ranking students from the greatest writer to the least performing writer. And grading can also be about, ideally, like when you're writing comments and giving qualitative feedback, helping students understand their areas of growth and how to improve. And I think also candidly that we give report cards and send them out so the parents believe that we're doing something in school. Like my child earned grades, my child earned good grades, that I got value for the tuition. It's a kind of a credit system, a proof that teaching and learning is happening. These many purposes confuse the matter. There's too many things going on what grades are for. And I think what we really want grades and assessment to do is inform teaching and learning, give feedback to children, and help them grow in the most efficient way. Let's see what the next slide is inviting me to talk about. I want to just talk about a few key terms before we go on. And I'm going to go from clockwise here. So formative assessment is what teachers do when they're giving feedback to students. Funny, I can't, now that the light, can't read there. I guess I don't need to read because I know this, but I wonder what it says. Formative assessment is what teachers do when they're just giving feedback to students. It's not a grade, they're just giving feedback so they understand and can grow in the practice. And for me, the best analogy here is a sports analogy. Formative assessment is the coach talking to the player during practice. Like you really want to help the player get better at the skill. Summative assessment is the World Cup game. It's the championship match. It matters whether or not you score goals because the person with the high score, the team with the high score is going to win. And in the middle years program, which is what I'm only focusing on in this presentation tonight, when we're doing summative assessment, after we have done formative assessment, we're using required subject group specific criteria that are in rubrics, or I'll talk a little bit more about, and students know that in advance. So there's no gotcha, there's no surprise summative assessment. When we're doing summative assessment, we're using rubrics that are designed by the International Baccalaureate Middle Years Program. There are 4 criteria in every subject, and each of those criteria has a rubric for different grade levels. And I'll say more about that later. But so it's very standardized across the International Baccalaureate Middle Years world. And then the last thing I want to say is task-specific clarification. So we have these standardized rubrics, but we can modify them or clarify them for the specific task that I am assigning to students in my class at La Scuola. So normally what that will look like is 2 columns where there's a standard description and then what this looks like for this performance. Let's keep going. Sorry, we're going to be real text heavy here, but this is what MYP grading is all about. Grades are directly related to those subject-specific learning goals, and there are 4 learning objectives in every subject. And students know about the criteria that are being used on any task before the summative task is given. And grading, I'm going to explain this a little bit more on the next slide. It's based on individual achievement data on those tasks only. And we're looking at recent information, and it's derived only on those summative assessment tasks. And students, we're assessing students in a range of high quality performances. It's not one kind of way of doing summative assessments. That I think is pretty different from traditional grading. Let's keep going. So on the left, traditional grading, the grading that I grew up in and practiced for the first 15 years of my teaching practice, grade books are set up. They have grading categories and they're weighted. And common things are quiz, homework, test, participation, etc. In some schools, I think participation is kind of a form of behavior, but effort could go in. Students may be penalized for late work. You could write the best essay in the class and you turn it in a week late. In some schools, you go down a grade a day. And so your perfect essay is failing by the end of the week. Or if you just never do an assignment, you get a 0 on it. And this changes the average because grades in many schools are averaged. And every task counts. Unlike in soccer, where practice is practice and games are games, in many traditional schools, it's the game all the time. You're being assessed on everything. This is not the practice in the MYP program. This is not the practice of criterion related grading, which is what we do. Our approach to grading is we organize by these 4 criteria. They're not weighted. They're 4 criteria and they have equal value. And we are measuring achievement only by those criteria. We don't invent new criteria after the fact or before the fact or outside of the fact. It's just these 4 things that we're measuring. There's focus. We, of course, deal with late work, and there are consequences for late work, but it's not reflected in the grade. It's a different kind of problem. The student who can't meet deadlines may still be a very high achieving math student, but they've got a time management problem, and time management is not one of the 4 criteria of the math program. We always engage in formative practice with feedback before we go to summative assessment, and it's only the summative mark that goes into the gradebook. And grades represent the most recent consistent performance. So you imagine a student who has been assessed 6 times in a subject, and let's call the subject music, and the task is to write and perform a song. And on the first 4 assessments, the child has just not mastered it. And then on the last 2, the child has finally come around, everything is clicked. In an MYP school, because that's the criteria, and at the end you finally got it, your grade should reflect the fact that you understand and can perform what we were aiming at. Whereas in a traditional school, you would average it and you would have a very low grade because it took you so long to learn it. That's not fair. And that's not what we do at La Scuola or in any middle years program. Let's keep going, Sally. Thank you. This is, we'll share this slide deck. I'm not going to talk to this whole thing. What I want you to know is just to have a visual that in all of the middle years programs, there are 4 learning objectives with their complementary criterion. And these are the things we assess to. And I guess what you can see here is it gives you a sense of what is important in each different discipline. So you can see in criterion A, there's a lot of knowing and understanding, but for example, not in languages and literature, there's no knowing and understanding because we don't test kids on whether they know the name of the main character in a novel. That's not quite relevant. It was like, do they understand how the character changes, and can they show that through analysis? Whereas in things like individuals and societies or science and math, like we want to make sure that some basic knowledge is there. So this is just for your reference to see that by each discipline, there are 4 criteria. And the next slide, I'm going to go into a little more detail about this. Each of those 4 criteria on the last slide has 3 to 5 strands that specify really specifically what that criterion means. So in each discipline, we have somewhere between 12 to 20 very specific statements about what the learning objective is. And as a middle years program school, we are obligated to assess each of those strands at least 2 times in the year. And we're obligated to use the published middle years program rubrics for those criterion, even though we can adapt them for specific assignments. And just as a technical matter, there is no year 2 rubrics. There's year 1, year 3, it's year 5, but we obviously don't have a 10th grade. So we use year 1 in 6th grade, and depending on which teacher is working, we use year 1 in 7th grade or year 1 for half of 7th grade, and then switch to year 3. And the differences in these rubrics is the complexity and sophistication of each of the levels just rises a little bit. Let's keep going. So I'm going to talk through an example of how this works. This is based on my own teaching of humanities to 7th and 8th graders in an inquiry in American history in which I focused on slavery in colonial America. And I had multiple learning objectives in that. Like I wanted to look at multiple texts, historical texts, secondary and primary sources on early colonial America, and think about different perspectives, and just give a broad foundational knowledge about colonial America and slavery, and particularly how we move from indentured servitude to chattel slavery and the racialization of slavery, but then also get students to do their own research projects. So for the first 3 weeks of the class, we were reading short excerpts from these different texts. We were viewing short film, we were having discussion. I was giving explicit instruction in note-taking and putting kids' notes up on the hallway. So we were commenting on our note-taking practices, and we were looking deeply into specific paragraphs in these texts and trying to generate questions in response to what we were reading. Like, where could we go with this really interesting detail? What more is there? But in those weeks, there was no grading. Kids were getting feedback. Kids were seeing their own notes hung up on the wall, and so felt some peer pressure in terms of getting feedback from peers about what their note-taking was. But no marks were being recorded in my gradebook. At the end of this first part of the inquiry, as I came to believe that students had a broad understanding of, at a middle school level, of colonial America, each student had to propose, from our reading and from our discussion of different questions, a research question that they were going to pursue on their own. And they submitted that formatively. And so I used the rubric, but I gave them feedback on their question. And so there were 18 different questions in the room. So no one was working on the same summative assessment. Everyone was working on their own summative assessment, but I had the same rubric for everyone, and everyone was getting feedback on it. Then students started to do their research, and I was teaching them about MLA citation and how you annotate and how you evaluate sources and comment on that. And so they constructed annotated bibliographies with their at least 3 sources and submitted it to me formatively. Again, I'm giving them an indication of where they are in this rubric and what are the kinds of moves they need to make to tighten up their approach to either asking a research question or gathering and collecting evidence. So let's go to the next slide. So then the students resubmitted, having gotten that feedback, having done that practice, I let them know, okay, the next round is a summative assessment, and I'm only focusing on 2 of the 3 strands in criterion B. So you're going to submit, and you will get a grade on these 2 strands. And so I just shown you as an example here. I don't know if you need to read that now, or if you can read it in the email. Like in the rubric, I can see that a level 5-6 was a high performance formulates or chooses a clear and focused research question and describes its relevance in detail. And I've given a lot of feedback to students that if you can't describe why it's relevant or interesting to you, that you're not going to be at this level. Like, it's not enough to ask the question, you need to contextualize it. Uses methods to collect and record appropriate relevant information. So this is, in my task specific clarification, I was saying, this means you've got 3 sources, they're in MLA, and you have 3 to 5 sentences saying why this is a credible source and relevant to your topic. So these middle school students have not written their history essay yet, but they've gotten a summative assessment on the setup of their history essay. So they're getting summatively assessed on setting up a research project. Let's go on. So the inquiry goes on, and it's a couple of weeks of in-class and at-home writing. And it's important for me that they're doing writing at home, so they're making progress, but also doing writing in class so that I can be coaching and working with them, and so that we can take breaks so that students are doing peer review, giving each other feedback. And while they're doing this, they have with them criteria A and C rubrics. And again, not all of the strands of those rubrics. I'm just, in this case, I'm saying, listen, we're using the relevant terminology, the vocabulary, the historical terms that we identified and discussed in our reading, and that your essay is really showing some understanding of the content concepts that you're engaging, and that you're using compelling examples or explanations to explicate those, that you've organized the information in credible ways, and that your reference list and you're citing any fact that is not your own, you have cited. These are the things that you are being assessed on, and nothing else. So for example, a student who has very poor spelling, that is not reflected in the grade at all. So these students have received a range of formative feedback from me and from their peers as they're developing their work. And then at the end of the research projects, they've gotten marks on these 4 criteria. And when it goes into my gradebook, it goes to these 4 strands, but when it goes to my gradebook, it really goes into criteria. So they've gotten 3 different marks on criteria A, B, and C on this one essay. And I can talk in detail about like where the strengths or weaker areas in the performance are. Let's see what the next slide is. I think I'd talk about that. So these are 3 different, these are my private notes more than what I would say to a student. I would elaborate more in my comment on the bottom of the essay, but you can see, say student 1 really is challenged by, actually no, student 1 is really, I moved the circle to the wrong place. It should be in the middle there. Student 1 didn't do a great job of setting up the research question or explaining or analyzing sources. And that actually seemed to flow again into sources in criterion C. So criterion B and C are weaker, but you can see that the argument is good and the organization is good. Whereas student 2 is has set up a beautiful essay. I mean, you can see that in the research, a very high score in criterion B, and has excellent sources, you can see, and really has, you can see in both criterion A and C, there's organization of ideas. Developing and organizing ideas for this student are the areas of growth. And then student 3 is similarly has it's just actually didn't follow the task in the setup and didn't explain why this was interesting and relevant as a topic. And so I'm being a stickler and saying, no, this is the criteria, and so this is where you fall on it. So these 3 students have pretty similar grades. but they're for very different reasons. So it's very different feedback for these kids. We're in a traditional school. These might be B's and B pluses or B pluses and A minuses, I'm not sure. But you don't know why. And with this sort of criterion referenced focused strands, we're giving detailed feedback. Let's see where we're going, Sally. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how a semester grade gets created out of all of this. Middle years program schools use a best fit approach to creating a semester grade. And we talk about marks on assignments and grades in a course. And in the MYP rubric, there's an 8-point scale. So the highest you can get on an assignment is an 8, but the highest you can get in a course grade is a 7. And the grade comes from these 4 criteria that are each a maximum of 8 points. So there's a maximum of 32 points. And then the middle years program publishes grade boundaries, guidelines. So for example, if you earn between 24 and 27 points on your 4 criteria, you'd be awarded a grade of 6 for the semester. And the other thing you can see here in this beautiful graph that Chiara Fornetti made for me is you can see that this student had a dip on some assignment. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 assignments here. But what we're looking at is what's the consistent thing? Does that one lower mark need to bring everything down, or is this student consistently working at a 7, 8 level? And we can say that actually 7 is the most consistent, and that's the most sensible professional judgment about what the student is doing in the discipline. Let's see what's next. Thank you. There are some things that are explicitly forbidden by the International Baccalaureate, and several of these have a lot to do with traditional grading. I agree with this, but even if I didn't agree with it, we can't use classwork and homework as part of the assessment. This is practice. I mean, classwork we could daily practice in the class. Students should always know when a summative assessment is happening. They know in advance that this is coming, and they have access to the rubric, and they've been given which criteria are being assessed in this. We cannot average summative performances over the year. Averaging is not allowed in IB schools. We need to look at the most recent evidence, and we need to look at consistent evidence, and we need to use our professional judgment to do that. And of course, we can't have one grade for the semester. Like we really need to be giving students multiple and different opportunities to demonstrate knowledge and understanding or analysis or language, etc. I want to acknowledge as a teacher that this is a difficult practice. Like for me as a teacher, this pushed me to learn and grow quite a bit. So a major benefit of this is that it improves teacher performance. It really required me to think carefully in advance about what specific skills and understandings I was attempting to guide students to do, and giving them feedback on that. And it made me embarrassed to think back on my high school English career and thinking like, I think I probably did give someone an 87 on an essay or a 92, and I just can't imagine what that communicates to a student. Like, what's the difference? Are there 100 levels of achievement such that grading in percentages work? No. I think for students, the major benefit is they get very specific feedback on their learning process. Like a 6, one can be proud of earning a 6 on a task, but rather than being proud and feeling like you've earned credit, like it's more important to see where does the 6 come from, what information is it giving me about what I need to do in my next growth move to get better at this discipline. And so what I think we're doing here when we break out grades in this way is we're really demystifying and disaggregating very complex tasks. And one thing I love about that is, like, I can think as an English teacher of criterion A is analyzing and criterion D is using language. And if students are writing a paragraph summatively, those can be very different grades for the same paragraph. So that the student who is really struggling with grammar and spelling, if I'm saying, okay, it's criterion D today, you need to proofread this and really get it up, that could be a bigger challenge. But if the ideas are amazing there, and I'm not using criterion D, you can have a very high performing mark on a paragraph that is littered with grammatical challenges. And I think that is a benefit to students in the sense that we can't learn everything at once. Like, we need to break things out. When it's time to focus on grammar and spelling and punctuation, let's focus on that. When we're really trying to develop our ideas and we have this big idea, but we haven't unpacked it, in middle school, let's not be thinking about spelling and grammar at the same time that we're trying to think about how we're developing ideas. And of course, we do use both of those at the same time, but I think a value of this system is that we can really focus students on more specific learning goals on the way to putting that all together. I also think this is a benefit is, like, by having these specific objectives and criteria, students come to see what it means to do a discipline. What are the specific moves and skills and toolkits of math that are different from art, for example. And I also think that a benefit of this is that it really invites us to have a much more diverse assessment practice, that we can use a variety of linguistic, cultural contexts. We can use our 100 languages, that we're not taking quizzes on the way to tests. That we can use performances that are much more authentic in real world. Let's see, Sally, how many more slides do I have here? Oh, good. Whew. Well, there it is. I would welcome any comments or questions.
Well, I can make a comment, actually, Doug, as a parent of a student that was at La Scuola and was benefiting from this approach to assessing, and I think really learned from it and was really inspired, to grow as a student and as a learner. And the example you made at the beginning of this talk, I mean, if I think of my older student, my older son, who is in a very traditional American school on the beautiful big island of Hawaii, where the approach to grading is exactly what you described. And, is actually a really good student, a good kid, committed to learning. And there is a very similar example to what Doug described of him completely failing one of the English assessments on 1 year. And this was related to something personal that was going on that happened in that class specifically. And that basically brought his grade in English that had always been an A down to a B, just because of this one episode, something that happened in class, which then affected, for example, the colleges it was applying to. It's now applying to different colleges because of this. One teacher decided that was going to count as an average, not taking into account a student that had been working really, really hard pretty much for his whole academic career. So I think, and it doesn't matter, I mean, it's not a question of which college he goes to, but it's the message the student and the learner gets about how do we value, I mean, do we really value them learning, or is this just some kind of, game quiz? And even the word quiz is interesting. So it took me a while, I want to be honest with you. I remember the first time we sat down in my office with Doug, and I was like, what do you mean we're not going to have A, B CD, and it was really, I still remember and treasure that conversation, and I was immediately inspired, and I was like, okay, I'm never gonna look back. So
I
yeah,
remember, Valentina, that you showed me your son's middle school report card. I was
exactly.
like, wait a minute. They're plainly showing you that quizzes are part of the final grade.
Yeah,
And a quiz is meant to give a student feedback before
yeah.
the test.
Mm-hmm.
And this is practice, and it doesn't make sense. You need to know what you don't know, but you don't need to be held accountable for not knowing it. You need the opportunity to learn it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have a question. How aware are the kids of the assessment processes that are happening in class? Like, is it explicit? Like, do they know exactly all the criterions that that their teacher is focusing on for that exact project, or and what impact do you think that has on their learning?
I'm going to give you a very honest answer, Danny. They better be aware. They ought to be aware. We're a young MYP school. I do trust that my teachers know that they must do this, that you can never give a summative without giving a formative, and that you must identify the criteria you're using when you give the task. And this is in our schools published and agreed upon, and like assessment policy. These are the rules we agree to. I also know that this is actually not an easy way of assessing, and that we are still learning. And so do teachers make mistakes? Yeah, I know that a teacher and a middle school teacher gave a summative assessment without giving a formative assessment, and a parent complained. I was like, well, you know what? You got to do it again, because that's not what we do, because you can't do that. We can't do gotcha.
Thank you.
So actually and I don't want to do gotcha on teachers, but so what I would say to parents is that if you feel like that practice is not fully in place, we need the feedback, because this is what we want to do. And I believe that the teachers want to do it also. And we need to just keep getting better at the practice.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? Actually, I think what I was wanting to also know is the example you gave of, focusing on one criterion in an essay. There's a time to focus on spelling, and there's a time to focus on sourcing or putting your question together, all those things. So if a student is new to the MYP and aware that maybe they're not a good speller or something, and yet the teacher is focusing on the other two, like, how does the child kind of interact and understand what they're being graded on, and how do they kind of flesh out the different criterion that they're being the focus? Do you see what I'm saying?
I do understand what you're saying, and I'm answering personally rather than on behalf of all teachers. I, as a humanities teacher, was always very explicit in talking about that and saying, listen, I don't have language on here this time, but I really want you, but I'm going to circle every punctuation and spelling error. I'm sorry, I can't pass it up, but just know that it's not being assessed. But if you keep making this same writing error, I'm going to talk to you about it, and I want you to correct it. And I'll teach you about it, but it's just not in the grade here. What I found actually is what I noted was that in my just chronically bad spellers and bad punctuators, when I would say, listen, the only thing I'm assessing is criterion D, language, somehow by some miracle, these kids could pull it together and be like, all right. I don't know whether their sisters were helping them or, but when they know this is it, this is the thing that this is the thing I'm looking at now. And so you need to start every sentence with a capital and end it with a period. And you need to spell your words correctly, and they can do it.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Manuele here. I have a question because I'm a bit confused. I understand what we were saying in the beginning, that they have some assessments that are not valid for the final grades, and in the traditional school somehow everything counts for the final grade. So if they do homework, the behavior, if it's on time, and but it's not kind of putting all the attention on the final assessment, kind of define the principle that you're not putting all the importance on one element instead of kind of evaluate the whole picture. I'm kind of confused of why it's not important all the tests that they do during the year, all the homework, to be on time, their behavior, etc., etc. It seems that then we put all the attention on one single element.
Manuele, being on time for school is very important. Turning assignments in on time is very important. Participating in class discussion is very valuable for learning. However, the math grade should communicate clearly about mathematical aptitude. It's not the place to measure attendance. It's not the place to measure class participation or time management. We have to do that in other ways. In the middle years program, we have something called the approaches to teaching and learning. We have so is everything set up at La Scuola? No. We are doing approaches to teaching and learning, and we are giving kids feedback on that. And I don't think it should be the same kind of grading that we use for academic assessment. So I don't think a kid should think that they have a 6 on time management or showing up for class. But it's unacceptable to come late to school 3 times a week. It's completely unacceptable. And as a school, we need to deal with that. That's a pastoral care problem. And it's grading is measuring specific academic skills and aptitudes. That's MYP grading is just doing that. In the traditional grading, we're packing too many things into one mark. So a child who has a B might be the best writer in the class, but he has a B because he turns it in late every day. It's like it's not helping the kid grow. The kid needs something with time management, but is a stunningly good writer. So we need to disaggregate that so that we're giving the feedback that they need.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Yeah, like Doug said, all of these things are important, but they need to be treated differently. And then Sierra, sorry, I see you have your hand up. We'll come to you next. But I also want to give you an example, Manuele, of the lateness, which is something that, especially in public school, is being pushed on the child and punished, and the child has to go to the principal. And this happens consistently also with students that may not have the ability to be driven to school by their parents. Either they actually have a parent that consistently drives them to school late, and the blame is put on the student, and it's actually the parent that drives the child to school. Or even worse, when you have students that don't have parents, drivers, and rely on the very unreliable public transport of San Francisco, or maybe come from the East Bay. We had a middle school student coming from the East Bay. So that student may come late and actually be an extremely serious and committed academic worker, and that's why these two things are is one of the many reasons why I believe also that these things should be separate. So I just wanted to add that piece, Doug, that may not be obvious to all. Sierra, I see your hand up.
Hi, thank you.
Oh.
Sorry, I'm in the middle of making dinner, so I've kept my video off. But thank you, Doug, for a really incredible presentation. I love this. I mean, I got my IB diploma. It all makes sense to me. I think it is absolutely the right way to assess students. I am curious, and I'm not looking for an answer. I just want to hear your reflections on whether this is a better way of reflecting kind of real world experiences, how people are assessed in the work environment, how they succeed, how it creates drive for future leaders, et cetera. And your answer might be that's irrelevant because right now we're dealing with middle school students and this should be a unique setting for them. So I guess my question is this thoughtfully designed because it feels more reflective of the real world, or is that not a fair, okay, I have a 2-year-old asking for help, or is that not a fair reason to design it this way?
You're giving me a great opportunity to provoke my capo, Valentina Mene. I think.
Thank you, Sierra. Thank you.
I think that we are assessing students with greater care than we are teachers. And I wish our teacher feedback were as sophisticated as this. So I think, actually, I think grading, like the worst place for grading is college. It just gets worse and worse. Even traditional grading, actually what Manuel is saying is like, there is some element of whole picture, you throw everything in. In college, it's like, you just like, it doesn't matter whether you show up or do anything. It's like, you turn in the final paper and you get a grade. Giving adults feedback in our professional lives is very tough. It's tough. I don't think a lot of businesses and organizations are doing it well. But I think that the middle years program is a model that could be used in a lot of other settings, that you really need to break down what are the 10 or 20 specific things that matter and give the feedback on that thing, and give the feedback on it summatively. Let people learn and practice and get better. Of course, you say, you know what, your performance as a teacher or as an administrator is not good in these areas. That's formative. And I'm going to come back to you at this, and what help do you need to get better? And then we go for it. I thought.
No, I think you describe, I mean, I agree on that point. I think, Sierra, I mean, what I see that can be beneficial from this approach, like in life, and I don't know necessarily in their career, is creating an awareness. Because I think, I mean, Doug is right, like a lot of people are unable to improve themselves, many adults, because they're not able to take that feedback even when it's given, or maybe as adults, we don't give each other feedback the right way. What I definitely saw in my own personal experience, and I see on some of the La Scuola students, is really this ability to know themselves a bit better, to know where they need to focus. And I think if they can keep that even if it's like a self-practice, so maybe even if they're not assessed well in the workplace, like Doug said, but maybe they can do some kind of assessment and continue to improve themselves, and then contribute in a better, greater way to the people around and their organization, the world, you know, whatever they choose to do. John.
Thank you all. I'm really enjoying this. I want to go back to Manuel's question, because he asked the question that I have too. Okay, take out all the attendance stuff, Doug.
Yeah.
Take out all the formative stuff. So all the formative assessments are out. So across the course of a year, I'm going to have whatever number it is, call it 10 summative assessments. And what I thought I thought I heard you say two things, and I can't tell which it is. Is it kind of the most frequent performance on the summative assessments is the grade, the best fit line? Or is it the most recent regular performance of the activity drives the grade? Because I thought I heard you say both things.
Yeah, I did.
And if it's the latter, then Manuel's question really resonates with me, because it's like, oh, all of the pressure is on the last thing.
Yeah, no, it is best fit, but I think we do want to emphasize recent, like just because of what is the likely trajectory of learning. So let me just take a PE example. Let's like, let's say that, okay, PE is never going to be one sport all year, but all semester, but let's just imagine that it is. And just like, you got Coach Sally teaching you basketball, and you're not very good for 2/3 of the season. But like, you keep practicing, and John, you help your kids, and they are working outside of class. And in the final third of the season, they're really operating at a high level. Why should we penalize them for starting at a place that just, they didn't have the skills and they put the work in?
Totally understand. Flip the example and tell me how that would work.
Yeah, so that's great. So the child, because it's COVID and we have mental health crises and things like this, that, you know, the child flakes out on the season in the last 2 games, but like really carried the team for 2/3 of the season. I need to use professional judgment that that poor ending is not what I'm going to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, you started well, but you blew it, and that's why we're not in the championship. No, I don't think that's right. I think we need to say, like, listen, this performer in physical education, like, the best fit judgment is pretty high.
So it's to reduce to simplicity, and I'm really enjoying this, and I really appreciate this approach a lot. I think this is great, but I want to make sure I understand it. So what I'm hearing is it's best fit with a bias towards recency, where recency is positive.
That's a good description. I would be very curious of why recent poor performance should outweigh, like, the student already showed he or she could perform at a higher level. So I'm curious about why now they can't do that anymore, and whether that should replace my previous judgment. Because what it needs to be, it's my judgment. Like, I am a professional. Like, I'm teaching here because I know something about this specific discipline, and I'm trying to model for you and get you to do it with me. And that's why, for me, art and sports are the best analogies. Like, what does it mean to be an English teacher? You know, I'm trying to read and write with you. And if suddenly you stop doing that well, I need to know why, when you were doing it well before.
Yeah.
And am I supposed to change my judgment about you?
Thank you. I have to hop right off. Thanks, Doug. This is great.
Manuel.
Sorry if I insist, but it seems a bit, I don't know if you want generous in a way, because you could say, okay, I didn't really put a lot of effort for the first half, but the second half I really put a lot of effort in, because anyway I know that's what counts. So I appreciate the example of Valentina. They say one event shouldn't determine your fate. And you know, when I'm not a statistician, but normally you take away the best and the worst when you do an average, exactly to avoid to have the worst grade and the best grade, to skew your average, and you take everything else. So at the end of the day, it still counts. I mean, the music is probably a different example. I'm not so sure I agree with the example, because it could be that you're really learning, so it's a different skill. But at the end of the day, you have to put your best the entire year. If the first half you didn't do much and you go party and your grade were average, that's part of your grades.
Yeah. No, Manuela, you and I were raised in the same grading system, and we're motivated in that way to, like, maintain the points. It's the banking system. You got to bank it up. This system requires or calls on me as a teacher to make different moves. So I hear what you're saying, and actually I know that still works, and I'll give you the example I had from this week, but I want to go to the opposite example. In the example I gave in the US history thing, those first 3 weeks, I wasn't giving any grades, but because I was explicitly teaching this approach to learning on note taking, I was telling kids, listen, you need to come in with the chapter I gave you annotated and a separate set of notes, and that's going up on the hallway, and your peers are going to comment on it. That was sufficient motivation to do the work. There was no grade to it, but they were like, oh, like my classmates are seeing what I'm doing. Like we would open our notebooks and like, we're going to have a gallery walk and see what everyone else's note taking is like. So there's other ways to create that credit, what you can say, like that you show up. But I also recognize that that works when all the kids understand and are dazzled by inquiry. And in a case where that's not happening, like when kids are coming from traditional schools and they're like, oh, wait, this doesn't count. Then I'm like, then I might use a traditional means like, oh, well, we'll see what your dad thinks about that. And it's like, you didn't turn the assignment in, and while it's not graded, I need it because he wasted the whole period. That in middle school, that tends to work. When you talk to a parent, they're like, oh yeah, like I'm paying for this, you better be doing the work. Having said that, I was working with 8th graders on their community projects, and it's assessed like a math. It's got 4 criteria. We're doing the exact same thing, and they weren't taking it seriously. And so Carmen and I, who are advising that, was like, okay, well, we're formatively assessing that now. Like, these are the criteria. This is what we're going to grade you on. Here's the rubric. Go ahead, have a look. Now turn it in. And we just gave everyone honest scores formatively. And they're like, what? I said, yeah, it's a good idea, but like, you haven't looked at the task specifications. Like, you have a goal, that's fine. You haven't said why it meets your interests, what community need it meets. Like, until you do this, there's no way you're going to be evaluated at a high level on investigating. This is what it is. And as soon as it was interesting, as soon as we assessed them, then everyone got focused, because they thought, oh, well, service is service. Service doesn't count. Community service, you put the hours in and it's done. But for us, no, this is an inquiry cycle. This is like design. This is like individuals and societies. Like, this is a learning occasion, and we're going to give you feedback. It doesn't work all the time, Manuele, and you got to be good at it. I hear what you're saying, but when we get this, it is so much better than that. Like, let's throw everything in the pot and boil it down and come up with a grade.
No, I'm sure, and I trust the method. I'm not a teacher, so I have a bias versus how I was raised and how I went to school. So it was more a curiosity than I wasn't.
No, and they're good question, Manuel, because I'm like Doug said, I think many of us here were assessed that way, and I think it's very hard for also us to, sometimes to let go, but also to understand how it can work. I was thinking actually about the service learning, and again, an example from the past. I mean, having these 2 examples in my home of 2 independent schools, one that was very, very traditional, and even the service learning that my oldest was doing at the other independent school. I remember when he was choosing, and we had all the things that he could choose from, and I was like, he chose something that surprised me. I didn't think it was something he would be interested in, and it's like, oh no, that's the one. I mean, I heard from so and so that this is how you can do your hours faster and get them in, and then and it was the same approach to getting the grades, and everything was done not because of the experience, without an attention to actually learning something to the experience. It was just to get to the A, or just to get to the number of hours. And I think for some of us are maybe more intrinsically motivated, and we will just do it this way in any case. But I think this gets them thinking in a different way. But like Doug said, I agree that maybe the downside is it's hard. It's hard for teachers. It's hard for everyone involved. I mean, I say this sometimes, as you all know. I mean, you've been here long enough that you've heard me say how, the IB framework and also the Reggio Emilia approach to some extent, it calls for really talented teachers, because if you're a teacher that is not really passionate about you're not passionate about your job, about teaching and learning, you're gonna get the hell out of an IB school pretty quickly, because this is really hard work compared to a more regular environment. Sally, did you want to add something?
No, I just, in hearing, all the comments and thoughts, I just am reminded that in this setting, learning setting, and clearly in the middle school as well, where the student is at the center. So if it's their research question is, they're at the center, and that's going to be with ample feedback, continuous feedback in different shapes and form. They're on this journey, and they're working towards some mastery around their research that's centered on their ideas. They're always going to be advised to, go deeper, or maybe rethink if they're hitting a roadblock. But I feel like that theme of the student center really and will have a great benefit across the disciplines and beyond, as you move into the careers, because it's, internal, as Father was saying. And I guess the other thing is, this idea that it's the learning is, there's that expression, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so we're really stretching out that growth and opportunities for growth in different ways, and still having this measurement that's so concrete in the middle school.
I see that Nina has a raised hand.
She does. Nina.
Hi. A similar question, I think, to what's been asked, and that was, I very much appreciate this method of assessment. I mean, it obviously is much harder work and much more thorough. But my question relates to how are the children then prepared for a different environment? So the key question being times when you're assessed under time pressure, and that's just the reality of college, is that you have those timed assessments. How do these kids tend to perform, and are they practiced at all when they get there?
I think that the difference in assessment practice, we are not acculturating students to want to be A students. We are acculturating students to want to be better scientists, or better social studies, social scientists, or better writers or musicians. And I think if we keep them focused on those, if our assessment feedback keeps them focused on that authentic practice, then I'm okay with that. That's what that's still connected to real world. And I know that they're going to pass through some moments in which there are assessment practices that I think are not really defensible, but even those are collapsing. I mean, the SAT changed this week in a major way. And I'm aware that college essay writing is like much more personal than it was when I was in college. Like the voice in the essay is changing. I mean, yeah, I think that assessment practice preschool through graduate school there are some revolutions going on. So I don't know. I mean, yes, there are going to be some moments where, actually, I don't know. I don't know if the kids in our school today are going to do standardized testing before they go to college. The SAT is trying to hold on to that because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. But
But as you can see, like Doug is right. I mean, I have a senior in high school, and even thinking about what him and Sally were describing about the college applications for their kids, they're just a couple of years older, and what's happening now, for my kid is completely different. And it's interesting. So to me, Nina, well, other than, the practice per se, which I think we do through the ERB, and Sally can tell you more about that, the ERB testing provides the experience. So at least they've left La Scuola having done, some of that time standardized testing. I think the ability to learn something new is what we want to give them. So I mean, they're flexible in their thinking, in their learning, and standardized testing is just going to be another way of learning. And I am really confident that the resilience, we help them develop, will also help them in those circumstances. I don't know, did I see a huge difference in the ability of taking standardized testing between again, this is not obviously a statistical sample, but in my household, like two completely different schools? Not really, no. So that was, although, it's obviously important that they have seen a standardized test. And yes, Doug is right. Everything is so different. My son is applying for both Common App and UCAS, the UK system. And he has been hilarious for us as a family to see how different they are, including the essay. So he's trying to use the same essay for both. Impossible. It's like, oh, take out all the personal stuff. When you go into the UCAS, you have to take out all that touchy feeling. And then when he was writing the US one, he was complaining that we are too happy a family, and we're good parents, and he has nothing to write about. He's like, I'm a happy kid. I love my parents. What am I going to talk about here? So yeah, everything is changing, I think, like Doug said.
Martha, you get your hand up.
Yes, great. Thank you for this presentation. So great. But like Valentina was saying, I could see how middle years program have like help. I have an 8th grader at the Scuola where I see he has grown a lot, and you say they learn to manage their time, be more independent, and be conscientious of, what they need to do, the progress. And visiting high schools, going to this transition of high schools with him and visiting high schools, I see how this middle year programs will really help him transition to the high school. Because a lot of the high schools, they talk about how go deep into subjects, and I feel like the Scuola have prepared him enough for that. So keeping fingers crossed, he will have an easier transition going through high school. And I just believe you guys are doing such a great job with this middle year programs and have helped. For me, he has grown a lot, even though he just joined in 7th grade, and he have made a change. So
thank you, Martha.
Thank you, Martha.
I was my last 2 years in Belgium. I taught theory of knowledge in an international school that did not have the middle years program, but did have the diploma and primary years program. And we were reintroducing middle years program. But I had, every year I had a couple of students who came from other international schools, from other middle years programs. So I had first year diploma program students who hadn't done the MYP, and first year diploma program students who had done the MYP. And there was a giant difference. Like, this pays forward. Like, yeah, I really wish this city had a school that was offering the middle years program in 9th and 10th grade to feed into the diploma. Because I feel like, maybe this was in another response to the earlier question, is like, yeah, we're preparing students for an experience that no one else is prepared to take on. I'm not yet dazzled by the 9th grades in the city. And I feel like we are preparing kids for more than that.
Okay, I think we are at 7:10. So we're gonna let you all go, and thank you so much once again, Doug, for doing this for all of us. It's always inspiring, and I really like it when these events spark conversations and comment and feedback from all of you parents. Thank you so much, Martha, for sharing, and thank you, Manuele, for the really good provocative questions. This is what gets us thinking, and we much prefer it than when we have just black screens and nobody asks anything. So this was awesome. Yeah, so have a wonderful evening, and
I hope next time I can get the parents to grade some papers.
Yes, actually,
Wine.
you don't
The
know.
wine.
You're lucky because normally Dad will make you.
Yeah, the teachers would pay for the wine if they knew
Alright.
you were going to grade
Yeah,
the
yeah.
paper.
If this was in person, this is what would be happening. So be grateful and study for next time.
It really, it's the way, it's the deep way to understand the difference. We'll do it.